questions. Known as the name of the Honourable Annette King.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question to the Minister for Social Development and Employment. Which, if any, of the 7 key recommendations of the Child Poverty Action Group's report left further behind will the government be implementing?
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr Speaker, I would no more implement that report than I would the Labour's so-called policies. But then again, that's the same thing.
The Honourable Annette King.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker. Does she agree with the Prime Minister who said this week there was likely to be 228,000 children living in poverty now, and is that more or less than when she became the Minister?
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr Speaker, I'm not going to speak on behalf of the Prime Minister. The question's directed at me. What I can say is we've got more than 220,000 children that are in benefit-dependent households, and by any measure that you take of poverty, it says that actually it is children that are the recipients of benefit households that are often doing worst in this country.
The Honourable Annette King.
Mr Speaker, does she agree with the Prime Minister or not?
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister is always right.
The Honourable Annette King.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker. Does she agree with Child Poverty Action that the position of children is a lot worse than it was 3 years ago, and the longer children spend in poverty, the more harm it does? If not, why not?
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr Speaker, I struggle to agree with pretty much anything that was in the CPAG report. It was so political. In fact, I think it's so political it should almost carry a Labour Party authorisation with it, quite frankly. So I can give you many examples of what I don't agree, and I struggle with that one.
The Honourable Annette King.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker. Given the Prime Minister said this week, quote, I am deeply concerned about every child in New Zealand who is in poverty, end quote, why has the government waited 3 years to issue a green paper, which is to become a white paper, which may or may not become policy sometime after the election, and which manages to mention the word poverty on 1 page in the entire document?
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr Speaker, and I think this really is the key, that while Labour sort of pontificate as to whether or not there are children in poverty and which report says there are or which report there aren't, this side of the House is actually getting on with real solutions, like 100,000 households that have been insulated, like more money into ECE, like $43 million more going into state kids in the last budget. You want to talk about vulnerable children? Those are the children that need us most, and that this side of the House are prepared to stand up for.
The Honourable Annette King.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker. Why does the government believe the interests of children have to be balanced with the interest of other New Zealanders, as the Prime Minister said, but they have no hesitation in public money being spent on bailing out South Canterbury Finance, the Rugby World Cup, kiwi fruit growers, to name but a few examples of the government's more important priorities?
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr Speaker, this government does have a concentration and a belief in actually supporting those children, and there is, quite frankly, the list is so long that you would not let me read it out. The health initiatives around immunisation of those children being lifted from 73% to 90% is extraordinary in actually helping those children. The extra assistance going into wellbeing. And what do we have from the other side? A knee-jerk reaction like a new Minister for Children that's going to do what? Have what kind of budget? I'd be interested in hearing responses on that.
The Honourable Annette King.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker. Is she aware that one of the key recommendations from the Child Poverty Action report was to ensure training allowances to support sole parents into education to enable them to move into employment? If so, will she reinstate the training incentive allowance? If not, why not?
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
I think, Mr Speaker, I've made it quite clear that I don't put merit in the Labour document of the CPAG report, which is quite frankly just a rehash of old policies and of what Labour perhaps intends to do, depending on how they change their mind in the next few weeks. Mr Speaker, on the issue around actually those on benefits going into training, this government is hugely supportive of that and stand by our record on it.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Before I come back to the member, it would have been quite helpful had the Minister mentioned something to do with the training incentive allowance. My hearing may have let me down, but I don't recollect the question was about whether or not the Minister would reinstate the training incentive allowance. I don't think it was even mentioned in the answer. The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr Speaker, in regards to the training incentive allowance, of course, has not been cut. We have simply changed the criteria to make sure it is addressing that more than 50% of women in particular that are on the DPB that have no education attainment whatsoever are actually getting the priority that they need and deserve.
The Honourable Annette King.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker. Could the Minister then outline what changes she did make to the training incentive allowance soon after she became the Minister? And did it include not allowing those on benefits to undertake a tertiary training at a degree course level, the same training she managed to get under the training incentive allowance program?
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr Speaker, talk about the politics of envy. Quite frankly, if that member was still running policies like she had 20 years ago, she'd be selling state assets, because that's what she was doing 20 years ago. So if we all went back to what was happening 20 years ago, it would be kind of ridiculous. Mr Speaker, the changes that were made to the training incentive allowance, I have reiterated in this House many times, was when we changed the criteria so that its eligibility was around the level of achievement, which was for those that were attaining to level 3 or under.
Point of order, the Honourable.
Mr Speaker, maybe my hearing is not so good today, but I thought in the previous answer the Minister said there'd be no changes to the training incentive allowance.
Order. I'm on my feet. What would have helped perhaps get a more specific answer out of the Minister on the last supplementary question had it not included reference to a slightly challenging reference to the Minister's own past life, and that sort of question always leaves more latitude for a Minister in how she answers it. The Honourable Trevor Mallard, supplementary question.
Can the Minister explain to the House why the withdrawal of eligibility for a group of people to go towards a degree course is not a cut?
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr Speaker, there was a change in criteria. Actually, those women can still go and get tertiary level achievements, and there is student loans for them, there is extra early child care assistance, there is OSCR after school assistance for them, there is an extra loan that they can get that is interest free on top of that. So no one is saying that they can't go on and study at a tertiary level, and there is a lot of government support for that.
The Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Is the Minister telling us that a group of women who previously got the TIA and people in the same circumstances are not eligible, that is not a cut?
The Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr Speaker, to the first part of that, the people that were receiving the TIA were able to continue receiving it, so they didn't actually get, that wasn't actually taken away from them. But yes, we changed the criteria to the training incentive allowance. I think everyone sort of acknowledges that, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, the Honourable Trevor Mallard. Order.
Mr Speaker, I think the member asked answered a question that I didn't ask. I asked a question about women who were in the same circumstances, not the same woman, and that part of it was not addressed.
Well, the Minister in answering said they, with respect to women in the same circumstance, they'd changed the criteria, is what I heard the Minister say, and therefore some women may not qualify under those new criteria. Is the implication of that, whether someone wishes to interpret that as a cut or not, or is up to a member, but I think the Minister did answer that question. Question number 2, Materia Ture.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Order, I've called Materia Ture.